You're listening to Real Estate Radio Washington, D.C. Metro on the Big Talker 1580. Now, live in studio, your host, local real estate expert, Ryan Sloper.
Welcome, Washington, D.C. Metro, to Real Estate Radio, the most important hour of radio every Monday on 1580 a.m., the Big Talker. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. For those of you who don't know, Real Estate Radio is a show dedicated to building the Washington, D.C. Metro's housing and credit markets one house at a time. I'm your host, Ryan Sloper, and I will be delivering it to this radio show every Monday from 2 to 3 p.m. right here on 1580 a.m., the Big Talker. There are a lot of tremendous opportunities as well as some much-needed advice that's needed in the real estate markets these days. That is my message, and if you have any questions, please call our off-air line. It's 877-245-2030. That's 877-245-2030. Leave your name and phone number. I'd be glad to get back to you by the end of the day. Joining me on our panel today is Louis Cammarosano, who is the general manager of HomeGain. Louis is often cited in the media as an industry expert in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, CNN Money, Fox Business, Smart Money, MSN, and numerous others. We're going to discuss with you about what happened in the markets last week, as well as letting you know what's on deck this week in the markets that could affect you and your real estate decisions. Louis, are you there today?
I'm here, Ryan. How are you today?
I am doing pretty well. How was your weekend?
It was very good.
Very good? Right. I'm trying to get the cobwebs out of my head. I came back from vacation in Myrtle Beach. Man, it's tough. It's really tough. The beach, it was 115 heat index, I want to say, down there. And, of course, I had my 4-month-old son, and, it's kind of difficult to go to the beach, and you run down to the beach, get everything down there, and then all of a sudden you're having to run back to the house because he can't take too much sun. So it wasn't as enjoyable of a vacation as I thought it would be.
And it wasn't cool down there?
It had its moments, but, overall it was just hot.
Oh, wow.
So going down south, I guess, didn't do exactly what I thought it was going to do. But we got
I don't think it helps if you go north either.
No, not necessarily. I mean, I know here in Virginia.
North Pole.
That's pretty true. I mean, I think if you get up to like the Jersey Shore and stuff, if you like those type of beaches, I don't personally like them. The water's freezing. You have to pay to get on the beach for the most part. $10 to get on the beach in Jersey. So I'm not paying to get on the beach. We got a lot of stuff lined up today, Louis. The big thing I wanted to start out with is obviously the S&P's downgrade of the U.S. credit, which they downgraded it from a AAA to a AA+. I know that this has set off panic amongst a lot of our listeners, amongst you out there that is like, you're in the middle of a transaction and you're like, how is this going to affect my interest rate? What am I going to do? We obviously we saw the writing on the wall for this a long time ago. But I think it's just interesting once it all comes to a head and now all of a sudden we're dealing with it. It's funny because I really thought that we would never default on our debt, and I continue to say that because we have the Federal Reserve. They'll continue to print money so we never do default. But actually what's happened since that S&P downgrade and in this morning is the stock market, more money is coming out of there, and people are still buying treasuries, which is interesting. What do you think? Do you think that this is just like a reaction right off the bat of what's to come, or is this going to be something that people are going to continue just to do the same what they've been doing the past 2 years?
Well, Ryan, you and I have been talking about for months the whole issue with the United States government being in debt and doing absolutely nothing to restrain the debt. And then all the focus became on whether we're going to raise the debt ceiling, which is actually odd because if you have a debt problem, raising the debt ceiling doesn't solve it. And then they came up with this deal where basically they agreed at some point in the future to start to think about cutting the debt. So people are still – it's in people's focus now that the United States has a debt problem, and we've only been downgraded by one small A for S&P, but we still have the AAA from the other debt rating agencies. But the real issue is what's going to happen when the United States continues to have to print their way out of the problem. Then you're going to have the inflation that we've been talking about. And buying U.S. Treasuries, I guess it's because there's nothing else people can think of buying. But if you have looked at the gold and silver prices in the past year, they've gone up far more than anything else. They've all gone up over 100%.
Well, gold was at, I believe, over $1,700 this morning.
$1,700 and silver close to $40.
Yeah.
And those obviously are the traditional safe havens, but those safe havens are pursued by a far smaller percentage of people that pursue safe havens in the form of U.S. treasuries.
Right.
And, AA is a good rating. A AAA is even better, and the United States has that. But in reality, the reason the S&P downgraded our debt was because of the charade that went on, where it looked like they had to spend a lot of effort and a lot of time just to figure out how they were going to pay the bonds. And what they should have done initially was all sides should have said, we're not going to default, and the bonds will be paid. We're going to have to look at prioritizing the rest of the spending, and they didn't do that.
To give clarity to the market, which everybody wants.
They gave none. They gave no clarity. They basically said, unless we raise the debt ceiling, unless we include all the spending, we can't pay the debt, and that freaked a lot of people out. Now, you and I know, and everybody knows, that that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
So what they then did was they created an environment where within like a week or two they were trying to figure out where they were going to make meaningful spending cuts, and they couldn't come up with any, so they formed a commission. We've seen that movie before.
And how did that work out? They didn't take one bit of advice that was given.
Well, no, they formed this time. No, they've done that in the past. That's right. And now what they've done is they formed a commission to meet, which is bound to be deadlocked because it's going to be 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats, and they're going to try to come up with spending cuts at that point.
Right.
And all these commissions, they're not binding. Each Congress has to do its budget each year, and we haven't had a budget for 2 years.
Right.
So you can't bind future Congresses for the next 10 years and say there'll only be recommendations.
Yep. You're listening to Real Estate Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Sloper, joined by Louis Cammarosano, the general manager of Home Game. We're talking about the S&P downgrade of U.S. debt. And it's interesting. Louis, I got an email this morning from a client, and this is just kind of why I think this is so relevant to talk about is first thing she sends me first thing this morning was, given the events of the economy taking a bath this weekend, essentially, I'm a little freaked out about the financial status now. What do you think the best move would it be better to move up my settlement, lock in my rate before they go up? And it's funny because, they've been the political banter that's been going back and forth, they've really just been trying to scare people into believing that just take our side, just do what we want instead of actually taking the proper steps to get rid of this deficit. And this morning, I had to send her an email back that said, hey, calm down just a little bit. In case you didn't notice, the stock market is now declining, which typically means interest rates are getting better. And, Louis, you and I have said kick the can down the road. We've used that term all the time for the last 6-7 months. And it's interesting because we keep saying that interest rates can't go any lower, but yet they continue to do so. And since last week, they've gone even lower. And this is one of those situations where if you're just looking at face value what the media is reporting and all the negativity, basically that the Republicans and Democrats can't come to a decision, is going to let interest rates go up. We know we've been saying interest rates are going to go up, and it's just a matter of when. I think at this point I'm kind of thinking that we need to change our stance to where it might be 3 to 5 years before we start to see these interest rates go up when that actual inflation does kick in.
Well, I don't know if it's that far off, but there are a number of ironies in all this, is because S&P has missed all of the proper ratings. They gave AAA ratings to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac 2 weeks before. They said Lehman was fine. And now that S&P has knocked an A off, everyone thinks it's a big deal.
Right.
So I think at some point, though, I don't think it's 3 or 5 years out. The fact now is the U.S. debt issues are now in world focus. China's making noises about the good old days are over. They're calling for a new reserve currency. This issue has become frontline and center. What's interesting is that the fundamentals have been there for years. It's just that it was forced to a head, and now everyone's talking about it. But the United States fundamentally has had this issue for years, and it got worse in the last 2 years with the additional spending that was done during the first 2 years of the Democratic Congress. So at some point, and we keep saying at some point,
I know.
Can down the road,
yep.
But that road is a dead end, and there will be a time where an alternative currency comes up, or people just are refusing to put their money into U.S. treasuries, but they're still willing to lend us in large amounts. There seems to be an insatiable demand. The dollar didn't drop. People think the times are uncertain, and they're uncertain because of this situation in the United States, but yet then they put the money in the United States.
Right.
Like they're running away from the tornado towards the cyclone.
Yeah. I've heard a bunch of the talking heads actually, mention that, okay, well, if the U.S. is a AA plus, then what is AAA? There's not really a AAA out there. That's what that's what their argument is. So it's like, okay, so what are you going to do? Pull out of the U.S. Treasuries just because they were downgraded to a AA plus?
Well, it's a mass mirage, and Greenspan was on TV yesterday, and he basically said the U.S. won't ever default because they always print up the difference. What a lot of people don't realize is they think, oh, well, now I breathe a sigh of relief. But at some point, and we keep saying this, the dollars that they send you, if you just print them up, are a debased currency, which means they're worth less.
Yes, exactly.
And that creates inflation. There's already inflation in terms of the money supply, and we see it in commodities, and you see it relative to gold and silver. But at some point, then the cost of living will continue to increase.
Right.
Solely because of the amount of new dollars in circulation.
Yeah,
and then they're going to have to raise interest rates. But as long as the rest of the world is willing to go along with this and think it's safe to put money in U.S. Treasuries, we're going to have low interest rates.
Yeah, and that's what and that's why I said I really feel like what's going on with mortgage interest rates right now and the real estate markets are really trying to. The one thing that they can't let completely fall apart is the real estate market. I mean, I say that. I mean, the real estate market has essentially fallen apart with all the foreclosures and short sales that are out there. But they can't completely stymie new first-time home buyers from wanting to buy now by letting interest rates go higher. So I always feel like, the Fed's always going to have those cards to continue doing that for an extended period of time. And that's why I was saying, it could be 3 to 5 years at this point.
Well, the Fed has said, you're right. They said we were responsible for the prolonging the Great Depression because we pulled back in 1937. They have said that they will do whatever they can to avoid a deflationary environment. They'll say they will try to keep interest rates low for as long as they can, and they have a tremendous power to do so. As long as the world is willing to buy the securities and as long as the Fed is willing to buy them, they will keep interest rates low, but that will just debase the currency. So if you are looking to get an interest rate, if you lock it in, there's no way this is going to go on 10, 15, 20, 30 years when we have 50, 70, $80 trillion in debt. If you lock in a low interest rate, I mean, no one's buying the long-term 10-year bonds. The people are buying the short-term ones. But if you can lock in a long-term loan at these rates, there's almost no chance that in 10 years that the rates are going to be low.
Yeah, and, Lewis, I'm just going to go ahead and read these out to you. These were the averages from Bankrate.com last week. 30-year fixed mortgage rate at 4.37%. That was the average. Now, remember, that's not a rate that everybody's going to get based upon your credit qualifications. Remember, your credit score, loan to value, all those things come into play. So make sure that you reach out to a professional when you want to get an accurate quote, because these quotes that you see online are teaser rates, is exactly what I call them. They're set up to get you to call or to enter your information in online so that they can spit back and give you some phony information. That's been a common theme. I've had a lot of clients come to me after they went to the internet and they were like, why did they ask me for a $595 commitment fee? And I said, because they feel like once they get your money that you're going to feel you're going to have to go through with the loan. So, that was the 30-year fixed. The 15-year fixed mortgage was 3.52%. That was the average. I mean, that is insane, Lewis.
That is
insane. And we're going to talk about later in the show about term reduction and why right now, if you do have the capacity and the means to be able to refinance your existing mortgage into going from a 30 to a 20 or from a 20 to a 15, you should consider that because of the difference in the disparity between the 30 and the 15 now.
Now, you do pay more per month, but you're paying a much lower rate and you can pay your home down quicker.
Yeah, and we'll jump into an example later, Lewis, of actually where I did one just recently that went from a 30-year loan to a 20 and they actually are paying less. Because
that's amazing. Also,
they were at 6% on their 30, but we'll jump into that later.
And if your home is in the money, then it makes sense because now you're building your equity.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense if you're down, though.
And you're down. Well, and that brings up another interesting point, which is what about all the people out there right now that have been responsible homeowners and they feel like they're being left out in the cold. They've got good credit, they've been making all their payments on time, and they're being told that they can't refinance because they're upside down. What do we actually feel about that, and are there any options for you out there that you might be upside down and contemplating how can I get out of this? I do have a couple of solutions that I might want to offer up to you. We got that coming up and a lot more from Louis Cammarosano. Thank you for listening to Real Estate Radio. Be right back.